Welcome to my class for class 8 supplementary reader. It so happened, chapter number 3. Chapter number 3, The Selfish Giant, written by Oscar Wilde. Here, before we start the lesson, I would like my children to know who a giant is. Well, children, have you heard of a giant? Yes, some of you might have heard it. Still, some of you might not know who a giant is. Actually, a giant only exists in the fairy tale stories, and it is supposed to be a very huge figure, human-like, and they are thought to have eaten human beings even. So they are very scary creatures. Do you think when we say that a giant, the very name might suggest that he's very fearful? Yes, right. His nature is far from human nature. And can anybody give me the name of any story associated with the giant? Well, there are lots of stories associated with the giant. We have heard of the giant story like Jack and the Beanstalk, Gulliver's Travels, etc. Okay, the giant, since they are huge creatures, we can imagine the type of house they live. They usually live in very big castles. Now today, in this lesson, The Selfish Giant, we are going to read about a giant who doesn't like children to come and visit in his garden. So today's lesson is The Selfish Giant. This lesson, The Selfish Giant, is written by Oscar Wilde. Let's know a little about Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was an Irish poet and playwright who was born in the year 1854. His notable work are The Picture of Dorian Gray, The Importance of Being Earnest, Lady Windermere's Fan, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, A Woman of No Importance, etc., and many more. He received Newdigate Prize in 1878. We will come across new words in this chapter. Let us know the word and its meaning. The first word is Cornish Ogre. Cornish Ogre is a giant of Cornwall in the UK, United Kingdom. Ogre means a cruel giant who eats people. Gruff means roughly, surly. Trespassers means those who enter somebody's land or property without his or her permission. Prosecuted means tried in a court of law. Here it means punished. Snow, frost, north wind, hail, these are here presented as characters and not the real things. They serve and they let the story move just as a person do. North wind is the chilly wind and hail is the hailstone. But in the story, they are presented as characters. This is to be marked. Linnet, it means a brownish songbird found in Europe. Cashment means a window that opens on the hinges like a door. Stollop, it's a phrase, it means came off quietly without being noticed. Feeble means weak. Slay means kill. Nay means no. And again the phrase who art thou, it means who are you. Now let's come to the lesson Selfish Giant, written by Oscar Wilde. Every afternoon as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peace trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds on the trees sat and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. How happy we are here, they cried to each other. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. When he arrived, he showed the children playing in the garden. Now here, at the very outset of the story, we are told that every afternoon, the children, on coming back from their school, they love to visit the giant's garden. And the description of the garden is given here. It is said that the giant's garden was a very large, lovely garden with short green grass. And over the grass, here and there were beautiful flowers like stars. And there were also 12 peace trees that blossoms during the springtime. We all know how a peace tree looks when it blossoms. The flowers all cover the tree, and it's really very beautiful. So we can picture the beauty of the giant's garden as described in the text. And even during the autumn season, the trees bore fruit, rich fruit, and that shows that the children would surely love to visit the giant's garden. They love to play in the giant's garden. Even the birds, they came and sat there, they twittered and sing the beautiful songs that they could ever sing. And so the children were really very happy playing in his garden. And so they say to each other that we are very happy in this garden. But suddenly one day what happened is that the owner of the garden, the giant, he came back. He came back after 7 years. For 7 years, his garden was meant for the children. The children enjoyed there. No one to disturb them or prevent them from coming there to that beautiful garden. But when the giant came back, the children were surprised, and let's see how the story moves on. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all around it and put a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." Now here, after the giant returned, the children were terrified by the voice that he called out to them. He called out to the children in a very gruff voice and even threatened them, saying that the garden belonged to him alone and that no one could come and enjoy there. He was so selfish that the giant, he built a high wall all around his garden, and then he put up a notice board saying that trespassers will be prosecuted. Trespassers means those who enter somebody's property without taking his or her permission. So now that very notice board indicates that no one is permitted to enter his garden. Let's come to the lesson. He was very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander around and high walls when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. How happy we were there, they said to each other. So now the children were reminiscing their good old days, how they enjoyed in the giant's garden and they used to talk to each other about the beauty and how they enjoyed in the giant's garden. Now since they were prevented from entering the garden, they feel so sad. They had nowhere to play. They couldn't play on the dusty hard road which was full of pebbles, and it is not nice to play on the road also. So they still reminisce and they still thought of the beauty of the giant's garden, and they missed it a lot. Let's come to the lesson. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and the little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgotten to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out of the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. See here, since the giant had built a high wall all around his garden, now the spring he did not want to visit. Though it came and gave blossom to all over the world, the spring did not visit the giant's garden. The giant's garden was still covered by winter, and it is now no more beautiful since it was covered by snow all the time. And even the birds did not come to sing there in his garden, since there were no children visiting in his garden. Even the birds missed the children playing. So they did not visit the giant's garden. The giant's garden was no more beautiful. Even, the beautiful flower that tried to blossom went back, slipped back, and now the giant's garden is covered by snow. Now the only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. Spring has forgotten his garden, they cried. So we will live here all the year round. The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. Here the winter reigned in the giant's garden. The spring hadn't visited. And so the hail, the snow, the frost, all were so happy to reign in the giant's garden. They covered the whole garden with white cloth. White cloth here refers to the snow. It covered, and so there were no greenery in the giant's garden. It was all white, everywhere white. And the north wind also came. He kept blowing around in the giant's garden. He was wrapped in furs, and he rode all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask hell on a visit." So the hell came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in white, and his breath was like ice. Now here in this paragraph, he here refers to the north wind, the snow. As I've already told you, the snow, the north wind, the frost, the hail, they are all personified, means made as human character, behaving like humans. So he wrapped up in furs. This refers to the snow that covered the beautiful giant's garden in his white cloak by snow. And the north wind, he roared all day about the garden, here refers to the north wind. He here refers to the north wind. The north wind kept on blowing in the giant's garden, and he even blew down the chimney pots of the giant's castle. And he said that it was really very delightful to play in the giant's garden. Even the hail was invited, and the hail came. The hail rattled for hours on the giant's castle, and the hail also broke the stage of the giant's castle roofs. I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming, said the selfish giant as he sat at the window and looked out of his cold white garden. I hope there will be a change in the weather, but the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. He's too selfish, she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced over through the trees. Still the giant could not understand why there is no change in his garden, why winter reigned for so long in his garden, though spring had visited the rest of the garden in the world. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ear that he thought it might be the king's musician passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird singing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. So what happens is that surprisingly after he was struggling with the winter, even he could not step out of his castle because of the snow, the hail, then the north wind blowing. He was always staying indoors for so long. But surprisingly, what happens is that one morning he heard a beautiful music and he thought that it might be the king's musicians passing by. When he jumped out from his bed and when he looked through the window, he found that it was only a little linnet singing. Linnet is a small songbird found in Europe. So he found that it was only a linnet singing, but to him it sounded the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. I believe the spring had come at last, said the giant. He jumped up to the bed and looked out. He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently down the children's heads. So now, when the giant heard that beautiful music, to his surprise, things have changed in his garden. He saw the children coming into his garden, and in every tree he could see one child seated on it, and soon as the child seated on the tree, he could see the trees breaking its blossom, and the birds started visiting his garden. Things have changed immediately, and so he was so happy to see the blossom, the children play. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. Only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and it was in it standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around, crying bitterly. See, after the children's visit to the giant's garden, things have changed. The look of the garden had changed. The snow, the frost, the hail that were happily playing in the giant's garden all went away. Now the beauty of the garden came back. The birds, the flowers all started to blossom. But one thing that giant noticed is that in one of the farthest corner of his garden, he saw a tree which was still covered by snow, and underneath he saw a little boy trying to reach to the branches of the tree, and he was crying bitterly. Let's find out who the boy was from the text. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring over it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I have been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I'll put that little boy on the top of the tree, and then I'll knock down the wall, and my garden shall be children's playground forever and ever." He was really very sorry for what he had done. So now here realization came to the giant's mind. He, on seeing the little child in the farthest corner of the garden, and he is struggling to reach the tree, and why that particular tree is covered by snow, he realizes his mistakes. He now came to know that it is because of the absence of the children that winter had reigned in his garden. So he made up his mind that he would knock down the wall that he had built around his garden, and that he would let the children play in his garden, and he thought to himself that he would give his garden to the children, and the garden would mean forever for the children. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stalked up behind him and took him gently in his hands and put him up on the tree. Now the giant, having made up his mind that he would knock down the wall that he had built, he moved downstairs to help the little boy who was struggling to climb up the tree. Seeing the giant coming out of his castle, the other children ran away, being frightened of him. But the little boy who was struggling to climb on that snow-covered tree could not see the giant, and so he was still there struggling to climb on to one of the branches. The giant quietly moved from behind the little boy, and he lifted the little boy and put him up on the tree. He found the little boy's eyes filled with tears. Okay, and now again let's come to the lesson. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it. And the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. So when the giant lifted the little boy onto the tree, the tree's look again changed. The snow, they all went away, and the tree broke into blossom at once. Soon the birds came and sat on the tree, and the little boy was also very happy to climb up onto the branch of the tree, that he flung his hands around the giant's neck and kissed him. Seeing the way the giant behaved with the tiny little boy, the other children, they know that the giant was no more wicked. So they all came back to the giant's garden. And with it, the spring season came, and all the beauty came back in the giant's garden. Back to the lesson. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to the market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they have ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. So now the giant was no more wicked. We come to know from his behavior. He knocked down the wall, he let the children play. Not only did he let the children play, but he himself joined in the children's play. And so they played happily, the giant and the children, in his beautiful garden, that people were very surprised to see him doing that way. The people also loved to see his beautiful garden and the giant playing with the children. All day long the children and the giant played and played until in the evening, when it was time for them to return home, they come to the giant and bid goodbye to the giant. Back to the lesson. But where is a little companion? He said. The boy I put into the tree. The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. We don't know, answered the children. He has gone away. You must tell him to be sure and come tomorrow, said the giant. But the children said they did not know where he lived and he had never seen him before, and the giant felt very sad. Here, the giant wants to see the little boy whom he lifted onto that snow-covered tree in the farthest corner of the garden. He loved that child the most because that little child had kissed him. That shows that little boy was the first person who showed love to that giant, to that cruel giant. He urges the children to come along with that little boy who kissed him. Children say that they don't know the little boy and his whereabouts. This made the giant very sad. From the text, every afternoon when the school was over, the children came and played with the giant. But the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his little friend and often spoke of him. How I would love to see him, he would say. So this shows that the giant still misses the little boy, though he loved and enjoyed playing with the other children. From the text, years went by and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden. I have many beautiful flowers, he said, but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all. One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not have the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep and that the flowers were resting. Here, it means that the giant, as years pass, naturally he also grows old and weak. Now at this stage, he could no longer play and enjoy with the children. And so what did he do? He made himself seated in a huge armchair and he kept watching the children at play. And he loved and admired the children enjoying in his garden. But still he misses the little boy, and when winter comes, he knows that there is a saying, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. The same thing, the same idea comes to the selfish giant. He also knows that it is only a cycle of the weather, and now though winter comes to his garden, surely spring will come in the next few months. Suddenly, from the text, he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked and looked. It certainly was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossom. Its branches were golden and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. So young, suddenly one day what happens is that the giant could not believe his eyes. He rubbed his eyes again and again in wonder, because in the farthest corner again he saw a very marvelous sight. There in that farthest corner, he saw a tree covered by white blossom amidst winter season. He could not realize what's going on. He saw the branches of the trees golden, and he saw silver fruit hung down from that particular tree. And again, to his surprise, he saw the little boy that he missed standing underneath that beautiful tree. From the text, downstairs ran the giant in great joy and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near to the child. And when he came quite close to his face grew red with anger and said, "Who had dared to wound thee?" For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of the 2 nails were on the little feet. So now here, the giant, to his surprise, on seeing the little boy standing underneath that wonderful tree covered by blossoms that bear silver fruit, he quickly ran downstairs, and he crosses the grass to meet the little boy underneath that beautiful tree. And when he came closer to that little boy, he found something strange, and he was filled with anger. So he asked the little boy, "Who had dared to wound thee?" Means he asked the little boy who had wounded the little boy. And because he found on the palms and the feet of the little boy prints of 2 nails that hurts him. Okay, it was the nails. When it is mentioned, we can imagine who he might be. So let's find out how the little boy got his 2 nail prints on the palms and the feet from the text. Let's continue. "Who had dared to wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the giant. And a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossom. So here, when the giant found 2 nail prints on the feet and palms of the little boy, he was so angry that he threatened to slay, means to kill the one who hurt the little boy. He asked how he got it, who did it, but the little boy answered that it was the wound of love, that nobody did it, but it was only the wounds of love. To his answer, he was so surprised that the giant knelt before the little boy and asked, "Who you are?" Now he came to know that the little boy was none other than Lord Christ, who had come to visit him in his beautiful garden. The Lord told him that he was happy with the selfish giant. Though he was selfish, he was no more selfish by knocking down the high wall that he built, and by letting the children play in his garden. He loved the way he behaved towards the children, and so he was forgiven, and he himself had come to his garden to take him to his paradise, the heaven. So towards the end of the lesson, the once selfish giant was forgiven, and he was taken by God to his heaven, the paradise. So now children, this lesson imparts a beautiful message that Happiness doesn't come from selfishness but from selflessness. Thank you.